Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen, and it has been a long time, my friends. I forget how to be a YouTuber, I forget how to do this, but I am back. I always intended to come back, and now it is time. I'm here with, an end of January review of my favorite books of last year, and I have to document it somehow on the channel, it just doesn't feel right for me to not come back and talk about my year of reading last year. I will say that last year was a pretty interesting reading year for me. It was an incredibly busy year for many reasons. There was just a lot of life stuff going on, settling into my career in publishing, and just some different shiftingness in my day-to-day life. That was just something that I had to kind of give some space to let be what it was, which is a very vague I don't know, description of what happened last year. I just wasn't feeling as compelled to document my reading life and trying to find the balance between working deeply in literary fiction publishing and then also saving some of this for myself and I don't know, figuring out how I want to present myself online with all of this. But I think it was more so just me overthinking things. So I would love to come back this year and just kind of have a more chill approach to talking about my reading life. And so yeah, I am back. I hope to come back somewhat frequently and to bring the podcast back and interview some authors this year of books that I'm really excited about and to keep you all posted about what I'm working on and stuff. I just, I miss having a place or an outlet to talk about books because that is kind of what fueled me for so long and still does. I still read, every day, and I just need to get back in the swing of being perceived, I guess. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into my top 10 favorite books of the year from last year. And I won't go in any sort of rating. I'll save my favorite book of the year for last. I will start with one book that comes out in just about 2 weeks on February 4th that I am working on. And it's just a certain book that kind of came across or came into my life that I just have the privilege of working on that I'm just so proud of. It's Bibliophobia by Sarah Chihaya. This is a memoir, which is not something that I read a lot of, but it is a book about books and mental illness. And this is something that when I was reading it was just the book that I had been looking for. And I think anyone who lives a life of reading or lives a life consumed by books, and if you're a person like me who wonders why that might be, or the impact that reading has on our lives and how we relate to stories and why we do, this is a book for you for sure. There is a concept that Sarah Chihaya introduces in this book of the idea of a life ruiner. It's a book that really changes forever the way that you see the world, or the way that you read, or the book that kind of sets you on a lifelong journey of reading. What is the book in your mind that is the one that kind of ruined your life? In a good way or a bad way, I guess. You can kind of interpret it either way that you would like to. I just love that idea, and the way that Sarah Chihaya kind of documents her reckoning with her mental health and her nervous breakdown that she documents in this book, in addition to how the books throughout her life sort of inform that, and how she sort of tried to think about her life through books. And so she talks about many books in here, such as The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, Anne of Green Gables, A Tale for the Time Being. All of these books are sort of explored by her in this memoir and how they sort of informed her in her life. And as a person who myself has been very, especially on this channel and just in general, very self-critical or very self-reflective on why I read and choosing the books that I read and thinking very deeply about that question and dealing with general anxiety and everything, this book was just something that really hit home for me. And I think anyone that loves books, this is a book that you just must read and it will likely hit home for you. It really asks us to examine why we are drawn to certain narratives and why they grip us or harm us, or why we try to seek solace in certain stories and how they harm us for better or for worse, and what it means to live a life informed by books and stories, and really thinking deeply about that question rather than just kind of skirting over the surface of it. I think the book really makes an argument that books aren't necessarily supposed to be a place for solace or just for pure happiness. Books are supposed to challenge us and supposed to incite a response within us. And what does it mean to really grapple with those texts and to really sit with them, and how do they inform our lives in the everyday? This is just unparalleled. It is a book that I'll hold with me forever, and I think it's just very, very important. So please read this if you are watching this channel. I think this is the one that I would recommend to probably everyone that is watching this video. So check this out. Okay, next I have My Death by Lisa Tuttle. This is a book that I think was republished recently by New York Review of Books. And this book is kind of within my all-time favorite subgenre or niche of literary fiction, which is a metaphysical literary investigation that gets a little cerebral and weird, that is playing with the text on the page and with the reader's perception of what's going on. Very fun. This one involves a recently widowed writer who begins writing the biography of another woman, and then the resonances between her and the subject become very blurred, and it becomes creepy and sort of like weird fiction novella that I just consumed in a single sitting. This is one of those like cerebral, mess with your head sort of reads that I really love. So one of my all-time favorite books is Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh, which this book reminded me of a ton because that also follows a woman who is sort of investigating something that may or may not be real, and you're sort of unsure about what the truth is. But it also, this book reminded me a lot of 2666 by Roberto Bolaño in a much, condensed way, and just kind of more on like a vibey, or how Lisa Tuttle is kind of playing with form in this book. But yeah, I think if you want something very quick and something that will mess with your head and kind of uncanny and weird, and you like books that are also about books and writing, this is definitely one that you should check out. It's very, very fun and a good one to get out of a slump, I would say. Okay, next I have The Third Realm by Karl of Knausgaard. This is the third in the Morning Star series, and I read all three of those books last year. And it's interesting because the first of the series, The Morning Star, is something that I tried to read, I think, back in 2021, and I got like almost halfway through it and I DNF'd it. And I knew that it just kind of felt like one of those reads that wasn't the right time or place. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this another shot. I had read some reviews about it, and it sounded like something I would like. Like, it's sort of this, very lengthy kind of sort of play with horror, but still using the sort of Karl of Knausgaard, my struggle, autofictional, philosophical, heady writing that I tend to really like, because I also read My Struggle last year and I loved it. So I was like, let me give this one more shot now that I kind of am more familiar with Karl's work and see if I like it again. And I absolutely adored it. So that's something that's also really interesting to me, is like when you pick up something and you aren't vibing with it, but you have this like weird hunch that it might just be the wrong time, and then you come back to it and it is the right time now, like why that is. I think it's kind of, I don't know, it's an interesting question of like how external forces might help like inform your read of something. Anyways, I read and like binged all three of them. They're very long, but I could not put these books down. They're so propulsive, and even when there's like mostly just vibes and not much plot going on, they're so fun to read. And basically the kind of conceit of this series is we follow a wide cast of characters who are in Norway, and there is a mysterious star that appears in the sky that seems to be altering things that are going on in the world. Namely, people have stopped dying as well, and there's just weird behavior amongst animals and in nature, and everyone seems to be sort of confused or unsure about what is happening. But the core of the book is really looking on a very micro level about these people's lives and how they sort of respond to the star, and how the star is sort of informing their personal crises in a very granular way. And there's sort of a baton passing between all of these characters, in a way that, is really surprising, because sometimes he'll go back to a character that you haven't seen in a while in a different book. And so this is going to be a sustained series. I'm not sure how many books are going to be in the series, but I put the third one in my top 10 because it sort of brought things back to where the first book was and reintroduced some new characters, and it kind of paints a better picture of where he's going with this series, in a really philosophical look at death and life and meaning, and trying to understand the unknowable and how we kind of make sense of that in our daily lives when there's so much about science and philosophy and God, or the conception of something greater than us, and how that informs people's lives. And I think that is just so interesting, and his writing is incredible. And these are also just really fun kind of genre-y reads too. Like, I know Karl of Knausgaard said that he was inspired by Stephen King when writing these books, and it was like the perfect mashup for me to kind of go back to something I loved, when I first started reading, which was Stephen King novels, with something that is kind of more attuned to my current interests, which is, I love autofiction. I love books that are really considering literature widely, and art and philosophy and death, and all of those things are like themes that I really look for. So this is like a perfect blend for me. So highly recommend it. I think the audiobooks are also really great. And I think if you are trying to look for something for like spooky season, this is also ideal, because the book is quite creepy, especially this one. Lots of darkness going on in this book. But yeah, that is The Third Realm. I can't wait to see the next one that's coming out. I think it's September or October. I'm pretty sure he's publishing a new one every year. So last thing I will say is you can read these out of order if you would like to, but I would recommend just going through them in order. But they are also like standalones if you would like them to be. Okay, next I have a short story collection called Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt, and he has previously popped up in a year-end best of mine for his novel A Minor Chorus. And this one is similarly just incredible. Billy Ray Belcourt is one of those writers that I feel very personally connected to his writing. He writes these very perceptive and engaging queer stories that are often about literature as well and about indigeneity. He captures this sense of queer longing in his stories that I love so much, while also putting that within the sort of framework of form, and like questioning how you can kind of understand queerness and indigeneity and yourself through literary form. And I think the way that he kind of, in a meta textual way, or like in a very blatant way in his stories, like asking those questions on the page, is something that really resonates with me, instead of sort of using a conceit or something to kind of get around those questions. I like that he always is grappling like kind of directly with his writing while writing it, while also keeping a story that is also just very engaging and has a lot of emotional perception and will just make you cry, and has like all the kind of like natural classic storytelling techniques that you would want, while also having this sort of like modern autofictional vibe in his stories. I think is just so clever, and something that I really just admire as a reader. So yeah, he's an all-time favorite writer of mine. I will always pick up anything he reads. I interviewed him on the podcast like 2 years ago, and it was one of my all-time favorite discussions. He is just like a brilliant mind that I am very grateful to exist at the same time of. So he's also very funny, and I think his humor also comes through in his writing too, which I really appreciate. So yeah, Billy Ray Belcourt is a legend, an icon we love. Another short story collection that I absolutely adore is Cheap Therapist Says You're Insane by Parker Young. This is out from a indie press called Future Tense. This one is a collection of short stories that is often like I would say flash fiction rather than short stories. These are very just kind of bite-sized little morsels of stories that are very existential and funny, while also like randomly will just like cut you with some, deep existential dread as well. I really liked the kind of undercurrent of like humor that makes it feel very like electric and alive while you're reading it. And it also has this kind of feeling of like you just want to read one more because you know how short they are. And his writing is so propulsive and engaging and funny and just like kind of subtly weird that you like are always wanting to see where he's going to go next in the collection, which I think is like a testament to his like crafting of this as a collection too. Like I know sometimes short story writers can be good like just in the story form, but I like when a collection kind of feels like you can't put it down, sort of like a novel feels, and this definitely has that quality to it. It's just one of those story collections that feels very clever and kind of like puzzle-like in a way. Like the writer kind of seems very smart and engaging on the page, and you just are kind of like, you feel like you're in the hands of someone that knows a little bit more than you, which is something that I like when I'm reading a story, or someone that's like smarter than you, but in a way that's like accessible and engaging, and just like, and have like a touch of like tricksterism to the stories, which I also really enjoyed. So yeah, I recommend it if you're looking for some good like flash fiction, single sitting read as well, like can like break a reading slump. This is definitely a collection I would recommend. Next, I have Practice by Rosalind Brown. And this is another novel. This is a debut novel that came out last year that is sort of in this subset or like niche literary subgenre that I love, which is stories that are kind of contained within the course of like one day or a very short time frame. It follows a university student at Oxford in 2009 who is attempting to write an essay about Shakespeare's sonnets. And what the book does is it's told in a bunch of vignettes over the course of the day, following the student as she is trying to work up the courage to finally start working on something. She procrastinates, she has coffee, she goes to the bathroom, she goes for a walk, she thinks about things. And while it sounds incredibly boring on paper, which I understand, Rosalind Brown writes with this sense of warmth and humor and like intellectual insight that I thought was so clever. And it really kind of brings to life, or like reminds me of what I love about novels so much, is that they are so capacious as a form that they can encapsulate something as boring as a university student writing a paper, but writing itself can be so engaging and interesting and curious and warm and open-hearted in its telling that it can create something that is just much bigger than, the subject at hand. And I think this is like a testament to that sort of writing. Another book that did this, I think, was The Guest Lecture by Martin Riker. Again, it's also grappling with literature. I tend to like books that are, exploring what literature means on the page and writing itself. And I just loved the main character. I love the way it was written. It's also a very quick read, so I just like that too. So if you want something sort of like life of the mindy and about work and about thinking, I think this is a book that you would like. Next, I have Anyone's Ghost by August Thompson. This is another debut novel I read last year that has just really stayed with me. This book is, I've seen it described as like Dirtbag, Call Me By Your Name, which I think is like the most brilliant way of kind of summarizing this book. And I will say, when I read the book Call Me By Your Name a couple of years ago, or like many years ago, I read it on a vacation in Mexico with my family, and that was like before I was like deeply in the book world or anything. I'd always loved reading, but then I was like, let me read this queer book that everyone's talking about. And I remember closing the book, and I never had like such an emotional response to something or like a piece of literature like in my life. I was like messed up, couldn't talk to my family. I was like, I just kind of need to like not talk to anyone today. And they're like, are you okay? Like, what is going on? And this book kind of had a similar feeling to me where like the sort of ripe, like emotional queer longing that is just very tender and running through every single sentence of this book just really hit me as a queer person myself. And it follows a young boy, a young teenager who's coming of age, who falls in love with a guy who's a bit older than him, and he is kind of dealing with his own family drama and kind of coming into terms of his identity and his sexuality. And the conceit of the novel is that there are 3 car crashes that his love interest gets into, and from the first page of the book that he does not survive the final car crash. But so you kind of know what's coming. You know that death is going to come and that this love doesn't work out. But what I think is so interesting about this book is that despite knowing that, the reader is sort of swept along and kind of understands how our main character sort of learns himself through this person, and how like this idea of being seen at all is like kind of the most intimate act, despite romance and sex and all those things being like involved in the story. It's really the sort of act of like what it means to know a person at a particular time in your life, and how that will always remain despite you losing them. Like the book is really questioning, more so than grief, like what is lost when you lose someone, but what is gained from those things, and how it kind of stays with you and informs you after that person is gone. That I thought was really interesting. And it was just so fucking sad, but it was also like I couldn't put it down. It was incredible. I thought the writing was really great, and it was something that just really stayed with me. And I remember I was like on the way home I went out like on a night out with my partner, and I was talking to him, and he's not really a reader, but I was like, okay, I need to tell you what's going on in this book because I can't stop thinking about it, and I just need to like vent. And I hadn't really had that sort of like emotional response to a story in a long time. And I think it was just like a good reminder of like, I don't know, I feel like there's like this sort of thing about like the queer novels that are meant to make you cry, like A Little Life is, in that kind of sort of category. But I think this one is sort of a good reminder of like how even if a queer novel is trying to make you cry, a reminder of how good those stories can really be if they're done really well in a way that doesn't feel particularly manipulative. Like, I know all storytelling is manipulative and it's meant to make you feel something, but this kind of felt very true and very real and honest and raw and like earnest in this way that I just really connected to. Yeah, and it would make a great film too. I hope this like really catches on, and yeah, I think he's a great writer, and I'm excited to see what he does next. This one is a book that comes out next year. It is the new Katie Kitamura novel. It's called Audition, and Katie Kitamura has been one of my favorite writers for a while now. Intimacies is one of like my all-time favorite books, and this one has that quintessential Katie Kitamura thing, and it's so interesting to me how Katie Kitamura she's one of those authors that like when you read the book, you kind of know that it's them, which I think is a very hard thing to do. She has this sort of kind of icy and like cool and sort of clinical writing style that is very perceptive, and it also is incredibly tense and like kind of creepy and foreboding, and like really there's like a sense of menace in her books that is something that is hard to kind of explain or like really understand until you're like within the storytelling, if that makes sense. Like there's not really any one sentence that can kind of get you that kind of vibe, but once you're reading it in total, like there's this sense of this like creeping menace in all of her stories, even when something innocuous is happening or even when the story is kind of mundane. So for example, this book kind of starts with like a domestic thriller vibe in a way, which is interesting. So we have this woman who is a wife and an actor, and she is having lunch with an unidentified man, and they're having a conversation, and all of a sudden her husband walks in, and there's this sort of sense of like weirdness because he turns around and quickly leaves, and you're not sure if he saw them, if he was supposed to see them, what the vibe is she cheating on him, that kind of thing. And what this ends up revealing itself to be is a novel that is about performance and about authenticity and intimacy in our relationships with people, and how that kind of plays with acting as well. She is really good at exploring the fissures in relationships and how certain misunderstandings or miscommunications or kind of lapses in those intimacies can lead to enormous fallout. And those sort of cracks are really kind of explored well through her prose, and that sort of like clinical, icy feel that is very perceptive and philosophical. And it just kind of like these like jewels of sentences that carry so much underneath them that I think is just a skill that Katie Kitamura is like uniquely talented at having. Why this book is so interesting to me is the way that it kind of plays with form. And I don't want to get into like spoiler territory, but this is one of those books that sort of subverts your expectations by the midway point. And I think this is one that's best to go into somewhat blind. Like, it's fine to know, like in the blurbs and in the copy, I think it sort of alludes to this being a story about different like perspectives or, you know, competing narratives. And so I think if you like something like Trust by Hernan Diaz, or I haven't read this book, but Trust Exercise by Susan Choi, I think does a similar thing. This is really looking at two kind of competing narratives and how those two things kind of inform each other. And I was just blown away by it. And it's a book that I like definitely need to reread. It's a book that like begs you to read it twice to really fully immerse yourself in it and kind of knowing what she's doing there. But there was this one part of the book that kind of helped me understand what this book is really doing. And in it, the narrator is reflecting on this film that she's watched. And when she's watching it, she notices like the lead actor is incredibly, she thinks he's incredibly skilled in like giving his authentic performance of turmoil. What's interesting though is that after she watches the film, she later learns that the actor was actually in real life suffering from dementia. There's a quote that I love, and it was true that a performance existed in the space between the work and the audience, that it existed and was made in that space of interpretation. And I think what she's doing in this book is she subverts the reader's expectations of what's to come in the story many times in different ways. But this kind of idea of how she's speaking or like telling the story to her audience and the kind of holding the space for an interpretation of whatever the reader wants things to be, like that is sort of what makes the art what it is. And I love how she plays with that dynamic of like how we interpret something is ultimately where meaning is found, but then how does that relate to the people that kind of make up that performance and how they relate to the story? And is there a way of kind of looking at those things all together in a way that kind of gives like a macro sense of that? And I think that's a really rigorous way of like looking at the novel as well. So yeah, this one is like the ultimate like mind fuck of a book that I read this year. But I will be rereading it soon, and I am hoping to interview Katie Kitamura about this book because I think she's incredible and I am just blown away by her work. So yeah, I see big things coming for this book, and I hope that you all like it as much as I did too. The last one before my favorite book of the year. This one is On the Calculation of Volume. This one is by, I'm not sure to pronounce her name, but I think it's Solvej Balle. She's a Danish author, and this book is so good. This is another one that plays with genre, so it kind of has like a speculative sci-fi thing going on. But basically, the book is about a woman who wakes up on November 18th, which happens to be my birthday, and every single time she wakes up, November 18th repeats itself. And she's married, and she is waking up, and she is noticing that the day is restarting, and she notices it, but no one else around her seems to notice it. And the book then becomes this sort of exploration of what time means and what it means to kind of be suspended and moving forward where everyone else isn't, and how we relate to ourselves within this conception of time. And so it kind of uses a Groundhog Day approach, but in a way that is deeply philosophical and kind of similar to Karl Knausgaard, I would say, and the way that they kind of explore literature and form in this telling. And this one was just something that I could not put down, and it kind of like was creeping me out because I couldn't imagine like I think this book lapses over a year and it repeats the same day, and she has to keep telling her husband what's going on. And what I liked about this book is that the husband, every day she tells him what's happening, he believes her, and they start trying to like figure out like what kind of like hole she fell through or like what happened to her. But then it repeats, and she's trying to get out of it, and you don't really know where it's going to go, but she kind of becomes more and more unraveled. And as we get further into the story, it sort of is like her diary is how the book is structured, and you can kind of tell she kind of becomes more abstract and kind of messy in her mind about how she's thinking about these things, but it kind of lends itself to a deeper meaning through her kind of falling deeper into the rabbit hole of time. And this book is a septology, so there's going to be 7 books in this series, and I've only read 1, and it's a short book, but it's already has so much in it that I'm like, I don't know where this book is going to be by like the 5th installment. And I know the first 2 are out now by New Directions. I have the second one waiting for me up here. But I kind of want to save it for a little bit until like the next one comes out, so I'm not like out of them, you know? But I cannot wait to read this whole series. It's just unputdownable, so fun, but also like kind of makes me spiral a little bit while I'm reading it. Like it gives me like immense anxiety because I can't even imagine. But I also like the added touch of it being a repeated day, like on my birthday, which is just a fun little nugget. And then finally, last but not least, my favorite book of the year. This is kind of one of those books that just kind of came in, and I was like, I don't know how anything else is going to beat this year. Like this is just everything to me. And I know many people feel the same. It's Rejection by Tony Tulathimutte. This book is just like unlike any other, unparalleled in its humor and its insight and its like scathing, skewering quality. I was reading this book, and it's like one of the few books that really just got under my skin and left me with a smile on my face and just like kind of giggling to myself while reading it, and just kind of also being like, this guy is just evil, you know what I mean? But I mean evil like in the best way, in terms of like, I can't believe how he kind of constructs these stories. There's this sort of like mastery or sense of control that these stories have, despite them kind of going in this sort of like kind of zany, absurdist, slapstick vibe throughout them, where these books or these stories are very satirical, and they're all looking at rejection and shame and characters that are kind of like they're kind of outliers or outsiders, I guess, and how they all kind of grapple with different forms of shame in this book. And I just really liked how much Tony was able to play with each of these characters and their kind of unique setup in a way that kind of felt like he was like trolling the characters and the audience, but also has something so smart to say about how we kind of understand ourselves within the internet era, and, in light of identity politics and the sort of kind of like bullshit way that people talk about these things and perform them online, especially, I thought was just so funny and so cutting. And like, he calls out everyone in this book. And I think it was kind of like that one of those vital books that anyone who reads it will feel something when they read it, even if you hate it, even if you love it. I see most people just love this book as I do, which I'm so glad. But there is something very devilish and like chaotic and evil about this book. But like, and I say that with the highest, utmost praise. It's kind of one of those books that just kind of swept me off my feet, and I like could not stop thinking about it. I reread certain stories. I wanted to give this to everyone. Like whenever someone asked me for like a book recommendation, this has been the one that I've been referring to people, because I just feel like you're going to have a response to it. And I also love that it's short stories, but it's also sort of a novel in stories. And the final story has like a meta spin that kind of comments on what the whole book is doing itself and authorship. And that's just something that is like catnip for me. And this book is just funny as hell and crazy and just like so wild. And the third story, I know everyone talks about the ending of that third story, but it's just unparalleled. Like there's nothing that will ever probably be written like that ever again, like it's just something that is so unique and you'll never forget it. And I will say that my favorite story, though, I think in the entire collection is the second one picks. I think that story is just like, they're all pretty perfect in my mind, but that one just like really, really got me. And those text threads were hilarious. But yeah, Rejection is the book that I would recommend. I mean, it's going to give you a response either like in one way or another. So it will elicit that. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up of my 10 favorite books of the year. I am going to come back with some books that I want to read. I'm thinking of doing like a 25 books I want to read in 2025. Because there's some, projects or things I would like to look at. But let me know what your favorite books are of the year. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought of them. And if you have any recommendations, I would really, really love them. But yeah, I want to hear what your favorite book was. And let me know how your reading year was. And let's just catch up in the comments. I know it's been like, I think 8 months since my last video. So I am glad to be back. But yeah, I will catch you all in the next one.